The theater was alive with anticipation, buzzing with the kind of restless chatter that fills the air before a performance begins. The judges shuffled papers, adjusted their microphones, and exchanged small talk while the audience leaned forward, ready to be entertained, to be moved, or perhaps even disappointed. It was just another audition in a long string of hopefuls who dreamed of turning the stage into their golden ticket. No one could have guessed how different this next performance would be. Then, from the shadows of backstage, a small figure emerged. A boy, thin, slight, no older than 12, walked carefully toward the spotlight. His shoes looked worn, his simple clothes hung loosely on him, slightly too big, as though they had been borrowed or donated. His hair was combed neatly, though not perfectly, and in his hands he clutched the microphone as if it were the only anchor in a storm. The audience's chatter dipped into whispers. Some tilted their heads, curious. Others frowned, skeptical. A child so young, standing on a stage so grand, in front of cameras, bright lights, and a packed auditorium, it felt fragile, almost unfair. The boy's gaze stayed low, scanning the floorboards as though he could disappear into them. Yet when he reached the center of the stage, he stopped, lifted his chin, and looked out into the sea of faces. His eyes didn't show fear alone. They held something deeper, an old sadness, a story no one else in the room yet knew. One of the judges leaned forward, softening their smile as they asked gently, "Hello there, can you tell us your name?" The boy's voice cracked slightly as he answered, barely above a whisper, "My name is Eli." The microphone picked up the fragility in his tone, and a hush fell as the audience adjusted, leaning closer to hear him. Another judge asked the routine question, "And what will you be singing for us today?" He swallowed hard, then pressed the microphone tighter to his lips. "Unchained Melody," he said softly. The words seemed to echo in the quiet room, carrying weight far beyond their simplicity. For a moment, the panel of judges glanced at one another, surprised. It was a song that demanded maturity, soul, and control, an enormous choice for a boy who looked so small beneath the stage lights. The host standing to the side nodded encouragingly, but the boy's eyes flickered down again, betraying the nerves that raced through him. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his fingers tightening around the microphone stand until his knuckles whitened. The crowd was silent now, but it wasn't the silence of patience. It was the silence of doubt. People expected him to falter, to crumble under the weight of a song that had broken singers twice his age. But the boy knew something no one else in the room did. This wasn't just a song to him. This was his story. Behind the curtain of his calm face, a storm of memories swirled. Long nights staring out the orphanage window, longing for someone to say goodnight. Birthdays that passed without a single candle, holidays with no arms to hold him close. The word family was something he had read in books or glimpsed in the laughter of other children, never something he had truly known. Every note of Unchained Melody carried with it the echo of that emptiness, and the fire of a longing that refused to die. As he stood there, poised in the spotlight, he closed his eyes and let out a slow breath, steadying himself. The world seemed to shrink. The cameras, the audience, even the judges faded until all that remained was the quiet thump of his heart. He wasn't just about to sing a song. He was about to bare his soul. In the seconds before the music cue began, there was a stillness that blanketed the entire auditorium. People leaned forward in their seats, sensing something unusual about this boy who hadn't yet sung a single note. It was as if his silence alone spoke volumes. The judges, too, felt it. One of them clasped their hands together, unconsciously bracing for what was to come. And then, with his fingers trembling slightly on the microphone, Eli took one more deep breath. The first notes of the instrumental swelled softly from the speakers, and his lips parted, ready to release the voice no one expected, the voice that would soon leave every heart in the room trembling. The first notes of the instrumental swelled through the auditorium, soft and haunting, filling the silence that had wrapped around the crowd like a blanket. Every eye was fixed on the boy, who stood alone in the spotlight, his small hands wrapped tightly around the microphone stand. His lips parted, and when the first sound escaped him, it wasn't the timid, shaky tone that many had expected. Instead, it was something entirely different, pure, rich, and heartbreakingly beautiful. The opening words of Unchained Melody poured out of him like water breaking through a dam. His voice trembled slightly at first, but within seconds it grew stronger, steadier, each note carrying raw emotion that vibrated through the room. The lyrics were heavy with longing, but on his tongue, they transformed into something almost otherworldly, a plea so real it sent chills up the spines of everyone listening. The judge's skepticism melted instantly. One of them leaned back in their chair, their mouth open in shock, while another pressed their fingertips to their lips as tears threatened to spill. The camera zoomed in on their faces, capturing the astonishment written there. None of them had expected this child, this frail boy from an orphanage with no family to cheer for him, to sing with a voice that sounded like it had been weathered by lifetimes of love and loss. The audience, too, was frozen. Some had their hands clasped over their mouths, as though afraid to breathe and break the spell. Others closed their eyes, swaying slightly, letting his voice wash over them. By the time he reached the second verse, the dam of emotion he had held inside himself began to seep through. His eyes shut tightly, his brows knitted, as if every word he sang was pulled directly from his heart. He wasn't just singing a love song. He was singing about every lonely night, every unanswered question, every yearning for someone to hold him, to tell him he was worth something. His young frame trembled with the force of it, but the sound that emerged was steady, strong, and piercingly true. The judges couldn't hold back any longer. Tears welled and rolled freely down their faces. One judge pressed their hand over their heart, whispering, "Oh my God," under their breath. Another shook their head slowly, overwhelmed, as though they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. The third judge, usually the toughest and hardest to impress, wiped their eyes discreetly, their expression softened into something rare, vulnerability. In the audience, strangers clung to each other. A woman in the front row sobbed openly, tissues clutched in her hand. A man a few rows back wiped his eyes, embarrassed by his own reaction, but unable to stop himself. Even the cameramen, professionals trained to stay focused no matter what, found their eyes blurring as they tried to capture every second of the boy's performance. When he reached the chorus, his voice soared higher, fuller, and stronger than anyone could have imagined. It echoed off the auditorium walls, swelling until it seemed the sound might burst through the roof. It wasn't the polished perfection of a trained singer, it was something deeper, more powerful. Every slight crack in his voice only added to the authenticity, proof that this wasn't performance for applause. This was a soul crying out to be heard, and the audience heard. They didn't just hear, they felt. Each note seemed to settle in their chests, pulling at memories of love lost, of longing for someone who was gone, of wishing for moments they could never get back. It was universal, and it was devastatingly beautiful. The boy clutched the microphone tighter, his knuckles white, as if holding onto it was the only thing tethering him to this moment. His body swayed slightly with the music, not choreographed, but natural, instinctive. His voice cracked just slightly on one of the higher notes, and instead of breaking the spell, it deepened it. That small imperfection revealed the child behind the voice, the orphan, the dreamer, the boy who had known more sorrow than joy. Gasps rippled through the crowd at that crack, followed quickly by sobs, as if the vulnerability had broken down the last wall of resistance. By now, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even those who had arrived skeptical, arms folded and hearts closed, were undone. As the final verse approached, the boy's voice grew softer, almost fragile again, as if he was giving the last of himself to the song. His eyes opened just a little, glistening under the harsh stage lights, and he looked out into the crowd, not really seeing them, but reaching for them nonetheless. The auditorium was utterly silent, waiting, holding its collective breath for the final note. He closed his eyes once more and let the last word escape in a trembling, achingly pure tone that stretched into the air, lingered, and then faded into silence. The silence that followed was deafening. For one long heartbeat, no one moved. No one clapped. It was as if the room needed to collect itself, to recover from the weight of what had just happened. Then, as if a single invisible signal passed through the crowd, the entire auditorium erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. People shouted, cheered, cried openly. The sound of applause was so loud it seemed to shake the building itself. And on stage, the boy stood trembling, his chest heaving, his eyes still closed, unaware that he had just moved hundreds of hearts at once. Golden confetti wasn't falling yet, but the electricity in the air said it was only a heartbeat away. The boy stood center stage, microphone still in his trembling hands, as the audience thundered around him. Their applause wasn't polite. It was roaring, relentless, a wall of sound that swallowed him whole. Some people were stamping their feet, others whistling, many still crying. To them, this boy wasn't just a contestant anymore. He had already become something far bigger. A story, a miracle they would carry home and talk about for years. On the judging panel, the three adults who had been ready to evaluate him were no longer professionals hiding behind their composure. They were simply humans, broken open by the voice of a child who had sung his truth. One of them dabbed their cheeks with tissues, unable to stop sobbing. Another leaned forward with both hands flat on the table, shaking their head as though trying to process the impossibility of what had just happened. The third, infamous for being harsh and cold, sat frozen, lips trembling, his eyes glassy with tears he refused to blink away. The boy opened his eyes slowly. His lashes were wet, and his chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, like someone waking from a dream. He looked at the audience, confused by the magnitude of their reaction. The clapping, the cheers, the standing ovation, it was all too big, too overwhelming. For a moment, he stepped back, clutching the microphone stand as though it might anchor him. He had expected silence, maybe even laughter. But never this. Never hundreds of strangers shouting his name, never judges crying openly at his song. Then it happened. One of the judges slammed the golden buzzer. The loud, metallic thud echoed through the auditorium like a thunderclap. In an instant, golden confetti erupted from the ceiling, cascading down in a glittering storm. The audience screamed louder, their cheers hitting a fever pitch, drowning out everything else. The boy gasped audibly, his tiny frame shaking as he looked upward, watching the golden rain fall over him. He dropped the microphone, both hands flying to his face as tears finally burst free. His knees buckled, and for a second it looked as though he might collapse entirely. The host rushed forward, wrapping a steadying hand around his shoulders, whispering words of encouragement that couldn't be heard over the wild noise of the crowd. The boy tried to look at the judges, but the storm of gold made it impossible to see clearly. His small hands stretched out, catching the shimmering confetti as though he couldn't quite believe it was real. The judges stood now, clapping through their tears, their faces beaming with pride. The one who had hit the buzzer pointed at him, voice hoarse but audible through the chaos. "You are extraordinary. You're going straight to the live shows." The words sent a new wave of cheers through the room. The boy's eyes widened. For him, live shows wasn't just another stage, it was hope, a door opening where none had ever existed before. The camera panned across the audience. People hugged each other, strangers clapping hands with strangers, many openly crying as though they had all just shared in something sacred. Parents in the crowd held their children tighter, whispering about how brave he was. Teenagers waved their arms in the air, shouting encouragement, their eyes shining. It was a sea of humanity bound together by one boy's voice. On stage, the boy finally lowered his hands from his tear-streaked face. His lips trembled as he whispered a soft, "Thank you." No microphone could pick up, but the gratitude radiated from him in waves. He bent forward slightly, as though bowing, not because anyone had asked, but because his heart demanded it. The golden rain continued to fall, settling in his hair, clinging to his clothes, sparkling under the lights. For the first time in his young life, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't just the orphan boy. He was a star. The host raised his arm toward the audience, amplifying their cheers, then crouched to speak to him. The boy, voice cracking, said only, "This was for my mom and dad." Those words were simple, but they hit the crowd like a second performance. Sobs echoed across the room again as people realized the depth of his loss, the weight he carried into every note. His song had not been fiction, it had been his life. As the confetti settled, the judges continued clapping, their smiles wide and genuine. The boy stepped back once more, looking around, his small body framed by a blizzard of gold. In that moment, he wasn't broken, or alone, or forgotten. He was shining, like someone finally stepping into the light they were always meant to stand in. The music swelled, the crowd roared louder still, and the boy's tears turned into something else entirely, joy, overwhelming and unstoppable. The boy who had walked on stage with nothing now walked off with everything, a chance, a dream, and the love of a world that had just witnessed his soul.